delivering value in blockchain networks today. And let me give me 1 second.
Okay, and Jim, you're live streaming as well.
Okay, great, thanks. So Alex is going to talk about distributed ledger and how it can create business value, which is really what we're trying to get to. It's not about the technology, but the value we can deliver. And he's going to talk about strategies for comprehensive digital transformation, and certainly DLT is one of those important building blocks in creating ecosystems and so on and delivering value. So with that said, I will say that Alex's background is deep in this space. He's been working on digital transformation for a long time and has spent a lot of the time in the government sector. His background includes an MBA from MIT, and he currently works with Publicis Sapient on a variety of different projects. And so he brings a lot to the table, and looking forward to the presentation. Before we get started, I do want to talk about, let's see if I can get to the right. First of all, we're hosted by the Linux Foundation. And Linux Foundation has an antitrust policy that's available on the website at linuxfoundation.org. And the antitrust policy basically says that Linux Foundation meetings involve participation by industry competitors, and it's the intention of the Linux Foundation to conduct all of its activities in accordance with applicable antitrust and competition laws. So please do not participate in any activities that are prohibited under applicable US, state, federal, or foreign antitrust and competition laws. Secondly, Hyperledger project does have a code of conduct that we all abide by. And the code of conduct is available on the Hyperledger wiki. And that Hyperledger code of conduct says, we are committed to creating a safe and welcoming community for all. We treat each other with respect, professionalism, fairness, and sensitivity for many differences and strengths at all times. So again, that policy is available on the code of conduct. And with that, I want to turn this over to Alex and let him get started.
Thank you, Jim, and good morning, everyone. It's always a great thing to start with a good conversation on Friday morning. Though with the pandemic, Fridays are sort of same like Mondays, and Tuesdays a little bit distorted, but kind of at least give me a sense of these in a Good Friday where we have time to kind of think more broader about what's going on. So I will let me also share my screen. So I'll go through a little bit of presentation, but it's going to be a dialogue. Like you basically heard, and like you were aware, the blockchain is superbly interesting tool. But being interesting tool is not enough, right? So basically, being interesting tool is interesting for somebody to read a nice article. As a matter of fact, there's lots to be said about blockchain technology and a lot of interesting things on interoperability and interesting layers you can put. And I myself worked on implementing Hyperledger for pretty much for all the blockchain solutions I worked on. So there's a lot to be said about that. But today I want to really talk about something that I've seen being very problematic in our marketplace, and also in public sector in particular, but also I'm bringing good experiences from public sector as well as commercial sector, sort of all as a practitioner and as a pioneer in this. So probably I was one of the very first pioneer to launch blockchain within the government and work with agencies and that. So I can show you some of my perspectives of way back and today. And so hopefully it's going to give us some better insight. So I am in sort of all of this tied to strategy and consulting. I'm a big technologist too. But we always start with what's really out there. And what's really out there is a digital transformation. DLT is one of those tools. And at heart, my company is basically doing digital transformation. That's kind of what we have focused. Not installing blockchains or installing AI or installing whatever, but really making companies to be what I would call digitally native. So how do you sort of be that digitally native? Just a quick overview. I think probably most of you have heard of Publicis Sapient. So we're essentially the strong the leader in digital transformation space. As well as in all other user experience space and technology space. So that kind of gives an interesting add an interesting way of how we go about a lot of work we do, and we do work a lot across the globe, both across the many industries, including the public sector or the government. So we take the stuff we learn from public sector, bring it to commercial, and vice versa. So, and probably you who read the Forrester Wave or Gartner reports, you'd see that we are on those sort of leading corners when it comes to digital business transformation, particularly some of the accelerators. There's a really interesting topic, like as some of the digital transformation expert who is in this arena has been doing this a lot, and even back from my MIT days. It's always good to see technology, but what I found is a blockchain paradox, and I was starting to scratch my head. So I talked to a lot of folks. I talked to everybody from students to CIOs of major corporations to government CIOs. And typically, in some of my presentation, I asked people, what is your knowledge of blockchain? And this is the answer I got from students. Okay, so, and that's okay. You can say, hey, students have this kind of understanding, some maybe basic concept, some minimal understanding. But then I go to CIOs, go to all others, the answers are not much different. So it's interesting. So we've been talking about blockchain for a while. People yet don't understand it. So why is that? And I was particularly intrigued because I think a blockchain is a true digital transformation tool. And if you think about what essentially Vitalik has said a long time about blockchain, right? It's not really, as you said at the time, it was really not putting the taxi driver out of the job, to use the Uber analogy, but really it's putting Uber out of job, right? Because Uber provides that in a way that's trust and that safety and that sort of all the verification, so that you as a customer of Uber don't have to worry about it as a driver. Well, blockchain could certainly do that. And it is in technology with enormous potential. So I was just wondering why this paradox is coming from. And it's not just students, it's CIOs, it's government employees, it's commercial, it's everywhere, right? Obviously, I don't count unicorns as a blockchain. I mean, but we don't all live from unicorns. Like we live from what's really going in a mainstream marketplace. And I was just scratching my head, and I realized that this paradox of transformation really comes a lot with the issue of understanding innovation, understanding the exponential power of innovation. Okay, we as a humans, even mathematicians, whatever you want to call it, we just are not good with exponential, and it is very problematic. So we typically think things are not gonna happen now. It's too slow. It's gonna be this way. It's gonna be that way. Or even if things pick up, we just say, that's not that still that dominant. But I just want to start when talking about digital transformation. I want to start with this effect, the exponential effect. And a very simple exercise, right? So, you look at if you look at a stadium for the American football, you look at the soccer stadium. It's much more closer to my heart. But look at the stadium, and if you were to put in the middle of this stadium, if you were to put the what I would call the exponential tap, basically the tap that will just drop of water drops, like one by one, but in an exponential fashion, right? So meaning like if in the first second you got one, right, then you get two, then you get four, then you get 8 drops, and on and on and on, right? So you get the logic, right? So if you put exponential tap, not regular water tap, exponential tap that drops, a little drop by little drop, but exponentially, right? So just a question to this audience: what do you think? How long will it take to fill at the top of this stadium? Any volunteers? We like to tap the top of the stadium. It's okay. You don't have to
45
stay.
minutes. I'll throw one out. 45 minutes.
About 45 minutes. Okay. Any other volunteers? All right. You don't have to be so, but it's also legitimate. There's lots of folks say this will take a year. If you think about it, it's just a drop by drop. Exponential is fine, but it's drop by drop. But if you take a look and do the math through this, it's the total area, this is height, this is stadium capacity, this is how drops are going on, But as you love the math, you can do that yourself. And as Jim has said, it's actually 40, the interview was very close. It was 49th minute. So maybe that's not surprising to some, actually surprising to a lot of folks. But to some, maybe not surprising. You expect the 49th minute will hit there, right? But what is more surprising is where is the water 10 minutes before this? So where's the water in 39th minute or 40th minute? Any volunteers? Where do you think the water is?
At 39 minutes?
Mm-hmm. Roughly.
I'll say 10% full.
No, I mean, and so is it like 10 foot? Is it like, 100 inches?
Oh, I'll say 40 feet.
40 feet? Okay, that's fair. Any other takes? Well, be interesting. I would, and I'm a pretty proud mathematician. I would just eyeball it something like maybe like Jim. But to surprise, it's only mere 6 inches. So folks, we're having a 6 inches deep water in the stadium, and we're in 39th minute, and in 49th minute, it's going to be overflowing the stadium. So really, what's going on here, right? So, we're sitting there for 39 minutes in the stadium expecting this exponential tap to overflow, for overflowing anyway. As a matter of fact, it's a 6 inches. So you're sitting there and you're saying, nothing's going to happen. Come on, this is nothing. It's just been dripping forever. Sure, it's a little inconvenient. 6-inch water, big deal. Right? I got my boots, right? I've seen this before, right? So basically what's happening is this whole notion of linear versus exponential. So over time, exponential looks like linear. It's actually roughly the same, but it's not. Because at some point, this disruption happens. And when disruption happens, it really turns into what we call the real exponential, right? And if you think about it, that's what's happening today with technology. And people just don't see it. They cannot comprehend it, right? So like many times people say, blockchain was such a good technology. Why we didn't have 20 years ago? What was so bad about it? We had it. Look what we did. There were nice pieces of work around blockchain that long time ago. But guess we didn't have technology. I mean, who could have distributed databases? What, on 1 megabyte hard drive? On what? 64 kilobyte machines? We didn't even have internet, right? So when you take into that enormous exponential growth, think about the cloud computing, high power computing, network, you name it, anything, the chips, the screens, anything, right? So it is adding on top of each other, right? So it's even surprising us professionals. I know I sat down a year or two ago, sat down to do this great facial recognition, and we're going to do it in AWS. We're going to use great stuff from Python libraries, and it took about 2 or 3 weeks to do it, but it was 95% precise. It was phenomenal. So cool about it. Then just a week after, here's the whole service available in AWS. You just click the button, that's there, right? And it's actually better than 95%. Yeah, I thought 3 weeks was pretty fast, but this is a few clicks now in AWS. So it's an example. It's going enormously, and it's affecting each other by having all these little things available to each other. One by one, accelerators. We're at this point today where AI is not going to require a deep experts. It's just going to be people clicking at things and getting it done, right? So I said this many times. We're going to one day have an RPA robot that's going to be putting an AI out there, right? So but then I'm like, but that's all great and fine. But why these things are not working, right? And you soon realize it's not the technology. It's not this. It's not the speed. It's none of these things. It is how do you use this? Like, how do you use blockchain? Where do you start with it, right? We're not installing them, right? So that's really the heart of it. What I've seen is that when it comes to digital transformation, blockchain is a tool to remove business friction, right? And that's well-known business friction. That business friction obviously comes from business process, and I can tell you that is a great use of blockchain. Wherever you can smell that, that's where it is. And obviously, that smells like lots of reduction of costs. That smells a lot like making things faster, right? And sure enough, if you do some of the data set from 67 by 67 live enterprise blockchain networks, not talking here about millions of other experimentation, but about enterprise level blockchains. About 67 of them, many of them on Hyperledger, if not all, is about 72% of a cost reduction. So again, removing that business friction, efficiencies. So yeah, there's a little bit of incremental revenue generation. That's all fair and good, but first and foremost is about that friction. So and kind of looking at that friction. So, but basically how that sort of works, removal of that friction, is really because blockchain enables this network value chain, right? So it's not a linear chain anymore. Like if you think about it, Tom has to do something with Stephen, and Stephen has to do with Mary, and Mary has to do with whomever, and it's all really great and well. Well, it's not like that anymore, right? So we have now actors, we have bots that can be on a chain and operate and close transactions. We have many actors, many people. So you have smart self-executing contracts, whatnot. So it is a different dynamic that just destroys the business process as is. So one of the things to think about blockchain, if you implement a blockchain to do the same thing, it's not going to work. You have to think how to change the business process. It's just like Uber app, right? Do you know that taxis have actually very decent apps, super good apps? If you ever use Red Top Cab, super nice app. It just doesn't work the same way as Uber. It's not efficient. I can never rely on it. I mean, and Uber app works not because it is a special to them, but it is because it gets to the solving of that business process problem and the way how these things are scheduled and done, right? It's not the same. That means being digital at heart. So when you look at the implement blockchain, look at more digital at heart, right? Don't look at just a little band-aid here and there. And here are the things we've seen from public sector and elsewhere in commercial. When we're doing it, yes, adoption and interest is growing. I wholeheartedly agree. And I can tell you, a lot of people want to take a look at a lot of government agencies, a lot of folks, a lot of CIOs, right? In many conversations, I'm hearing, oh, just a database. Let's, and I just install it and it'll be okay. It'll replace even my Oracle databases. And so that's just kind of one way to look at it. And it's not technology solution, honestly. It is a really modernization framework. And I'll share with you my ideas how that all works in the ecosystem. And it is by really leveraging other technologies and other ideas to lean on top of each other to get the effect you look in. But if you do not start from the very first, is from the user and from the business value, that's going to find a lot. You're going to find yourself in a lot of troubles, and that's hence the roadblocks we've seen. I mean, every single agency, everything that we talk about is there's no business case. Where's business case? Our colleague from XIAC for the public sector, they actually designed a very good book case. You're probably familiar with it. You can go and download, which assign points to the business case. It's very super interesting. World Bank uses it, as many others have used. I use it myself. But it is a very good starting point. And I've seen that in particularly government sector that starts to be a slippery thing. And there's no regard for users here. Many times I've been in Oxford conversation just talks about backend systems. It's on the contrary, what the user is going to see. And so users have limited buy-in, and typically users get tortured with the blockchain. I don't think users care about blockchain. Users care about their business problem, right? There's a lot of lack of agility that I've seen in product engineering. People do blockchain project. That such thing doesn't exist. The only thing that exists is your product that you're building. What are you doing? You're building a new contracting system with blockchain? Great, that's your product. Make it very agile. You don't need to do a million tons of analysis, right? On the contrary, analysis is pretty straightforward if you thought on what it is, right? And that's kind of get to the really focus on a business and not constant firefighting. So it's a really interesting thing we've kind of seen around there. So out of this, kind of three big things: how to put the blockchain in the center of digital transformation that I've seen working across the industry, including public sector, is really make it a part of foundational layer to enable transformation, not the only tool. So if your project is called blockchain or DLT, your project is doomed to fail. I don't know any project that's just named like that. It has to solve some certain problem. What I've noticed working really well with the blockchain, and we're doing lots of accelerators of different kind, is really start that at the heart. If you really start that out there with the user experience, what's that? What is that? What are you building? What people will be perceiving, right? And then you start to layer. Okay, what's how my data is going to be organized, like that. You get that blockchain as your distributed ledger. You have it there. even today, we're seeing some increased speeds where we can use blockchain in applications we couldn't think of it yesterday, like digital marketing. When transactions move a million times a day, I use a lot of blockchain in federal contracting. Obviously, you don't have a million transactions per second. It's kind of slow, quote to quote. So you have a lot of slack. But even in the fast-moving applications, it can work. So you have that as a ledger, and then layering on top of it smart contracts and AI. Because with blockchain, you're going to get better captured data. When you get better captured data, you can build all those services on top of it to really understand and get insight in that data, right? So thinking about that, that's going to get there. Just putting a layer of blockchain, so what? It's a database. It's not exciting. I haven't put it in Excel. But the way you go about it, doing it, is important. You cannot go on this until you microservice the environment, until you do testing automation, until you do DevOps. Until you can turn a dime to deploy something, see, touch, move on, right? That's what will bring the IT modernization. Without that engineering maturity, there is no blockchain implementation. It doesn't work in the garage, 3 guys doing it, never done QA on it, don't know what automation is. Oh, and we'll deploy it once in 3 months. Well, it doesn't work. The idea is great, but you need that engineering muscle to get to there. And that's not easy. I've seen many large companies struggling with it. It's easier said than done. Oh, just, daily deploy. Well, easier said than done. We'll daily deploy the blockchain solution and make sure that databases and integrity and all of that. There's a lot of things around that. But if you think about that as a sort of ecosystem, then it's going to start to make a lot more sense to all of you. And as I said, with a really strong user experience, it's just no technology success. It's just not going to get that. It is typically blockchain not visible for people. Yeah, I have to yet to show me any user who understand it, and you have to yet to show me anybody really who cares about it on a front end, meaning those people who are really going to be out doing the apps. Does a Uber user care about their great mobile whatever Uber is doing? I don't think so. So from that perspective, this really starting with the human-centered design and discovering the problem, making track, building the use case, and going through it is something that is going to get somewhere. And some government agencies are better than that, some are not. So it is something that we as a practitioners need to bring down there. And with that, blockchain only works if people adopt it. If you just build it and hope people are going to use it, even if it's the greatest ROI, quote to quote, not going to work. What basically is what's really working here is that this has to deliver value for users, for end user, right? Yes, also business value for corporation or a government agency, but also to the end user. So it's a combination of it. So efficiencies, they are obviously in data, but there's a lot of other ones that are there. And that needs really to be shown and demonstrated. Those people need to be brought to the process, to try it out, to view it. It cannot be a corporate installation of this. Probably not going to work. And thinking about this, right, as like this little simple framework. If you look at the ROI and user pain point, right, it's a nice simple framework that you can do. How to kind of mix that, because sometimes ROI does not align with user pain points. So I mean, if it's aligned, right, then it's a star up there in the top corner. That's great. That's awesome. But good luck with that. That doesn't align all the time, right? Also, the sort of the weird idea that's an X corner, which are not user pain points and ROI, that typically people go fast through it. But much interesting is that box over there, where you have a lower user pain point but enormous ROI. So think about it. So the government agency had enormous cost savings, but really it's not solving user problems. Yeah, it's a great idea. It's super good. Management is fine, but you go to users, they're like, sure, it's not making my life any easier. Actually, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, it helps the organization, but not me. That requires serious change management and requires actually looking at what really lever there is for the user and how do you do it. And you got to do that constantly, right? So it's not an option. I think it's necessity of how you think about these digital transformations, particularly involving blockchain, which is sort of still today mysterious, invisible tool. I know we all who are deep into this, we've seen these things. I talked to a number of CIOs in a large enterprises, even high-tech enterprises, and I can tell you it's not day to day to them. They are still very careful about it. So the more we can focus on things like that, the successful we'll be in rolling out the technology. So like, I don't want to sound like I'm putting the party down. So being as a big blockchain pioneer in public sector, and being also a what I would call really excited with digital transformation, I want to leave the impression that I see the doom. Not at all. I just see these issues that are dear to my heart, and I've seen them going on around there. But there's a lot of sign of hope, and I find it in data. You see a lot of the data. So when I ran with the number of adults, a simple analysis of when a blockchain solution, I offer them how they should be implemented, right? I think it's really good among a lot of these folks, particularly in public sector agencies. They're looking there to start small, looking to start a proof of concept. They're looking to that. There's no big bangs, and my heart, immediately goes, oh, that's kind of cool, right? It's a responsible way to roll out, a responsible way to make this happen, a responsible way to grow. So that's a big sign of hope. Also, when you ask what's most critical in adoption to make this work, everybody gets a human-centered design. You cannot start with that. So do not start with technologists in the room thinking about how nodes work, interoperability, and putting that fascinating people with zeros and ones being stored in a chain. That's not the way to go about it. It's really about that human-centered design, and people kind of really get that, and it is ultimately what's critical for adoption. So I'll stop here, but I want to leave you with this really thought that, as you can tell, I like this sort of Uber analogies. But if you think about it, back in 2000-ish, we were talking to our kids and talking to everybody, don't talk to strangers on the internet, right? Never get in a stranger's car, right? 2016, 10 years afterwards, that's about what I recall. We kind of went through it, and we're advising everybody to use Uber. You get in your car and you go, right? We're kind of in a blockchain in between 2006 and 2016, right? We're still telling sort of the corporations, telling the people, well, don't talk blockchain around, don't hang around. Who knows what's going to exactly happen? We can experiment, we can add things, but I promise you, think about that exponential curve of innovation that's happening. I think before you know it, it is going to hit us, like it's back to 2016 for Uber, where it became such a mainstream. And it wasn't. So the same thing is going to happen in blockchain. The same thing that happened with the cloud. The same thing will happen in other things. We're seeing a lot of that going on. And I think that is which is actually very exciting. So for us as the practitioners, particularly those who love technology, adhere to it, including myself, it is really kind of putting that in a right perspective and understanding how we can work with organizations to make that happen. So I'll stop here. Transfer the floor over back to you, Jim, for any additional questions or any additional kind of thoughts here. But this is something that I personally, as well as Sapient, we've seen across many blockchains projects, but in commercial and public sector. It is what I would call the main obstacle in making this work.
Yeah, so it's an interesting ending slide. Thank you so much for the session. It's interesting to end on the Uber slide that you have, just because sometimes there is controversy around Uber, and exactly as you said, strangers getting in their car. But that said, I think you covered almost the entire planet that's possible in terms of the concepts on value. I want to open it up to the floor and just say, if you have questions or ideas, please either raise your hand or unmute yourself and just go ahead and ask Alex what your thought is. So, of course, I always have a million questions, but anybody else want to ask a question? I'll throw one thing out there. Alex, your example on the stadium, the exponential one.
Mm-hmm.
So my background actually is distributed data before blockchain. So I was engineering that all over the place. So distributed data, real time, was not new, right? Blockchain had nothing to do with that. What's interesting to your example, and I use this and I can see, it sounds idiotic. If you want to predict the future, look to the past, because, and I'll argue many times, we have what I call solution design patterns in the past that do work. They're just not applied on new technology or new contexts. And so the most common thing, I think, is stealing those and reapplying them to the current context. And the best example is your stadium example about exponential growth. So when I listen and I look at Hyperledger, I just got off a project where Hyperledger Fabric, we were at the point where we were doing 200 transactions a second, which is pretty good in Fabric. It's not meeting the exact benchmarks IBM publishes with their different, I'll call it, cluster sizes and so on at all, but that's a reasonably good benchmark. And if you compare 200 TPS of real transactions to what you can do in Ethernet or Bitcoin, it's millions of miles ahead. Their layer 2 architecture, their layer 2s that they're promoting is not designed for what I call high volume real-time anything. And it never will be. It is a different world. But I'm optimistic about the future. And the only reason I say that is going back 5 years ago, I led a project for Apple on creating a data warehouse with data lake, data services, and all that. And in there, we were just using MySQL, right? Just the regular database. But tuning matters, not even more the capacity. And so at the end of it, I wound up being able to do 3.3 billion transactions, writes, not reads, writes in MySQL in 19 hours. And it's like, I compare that to what we just did in Fabric, and that's almost 200 times faster, not quite, than what we are able to achieve in Fabric today. And I look at it and say, oh, what's the difference? The difference is we have yet to apply those engineering patterns onto blockchain. So when somebody says to me, it looks like, ooh, it's kind of slow. Well, yeah, because we haven't done much on the engineering end to date, honestly. And so in that sense, I'll say the landscape is wide open to look at other applications that other people would run away from, because there's not too many places where I can say a single server did 3.3 billion transactions in 19 hours. And if you clustered that up, by 10 times, there's not a lot you couldn't handle. And so I'll say again, it's the engineering design stuff. And the biggest thing, to your point on constraints, is what people, and I'll say specifically engineers, bring to the table, which is assumptions about how it has to work, how it has to be done, and what can't be done. And what's really amazing is when you flip it and say, well, what if we just eliminated those? Pretend I'm the idiot in the room and just ask the questions. All of a sudden, all those constraints, oh yeah, there's another way to do that we don't have to apply today's technology or today's solution pattern. So it opens up the door endlessly to things that people assume just based on current results, we're sort of locked into to some degree. So that's a big thing. One thing I'll ask you, and along that line on the engineering thing, I laugh. The concept of, as you know, many blockchains use what I call a Merkle tree, right? As a way to organize data on a blockchain. And so one of the simple things I always laugh about is like, okay, that simple slogan that says you can't see the forest through the trees. And what's missing is the Merkle forest. And somehow nobody came up with the idea that Merkle forest isn't there today, and yet it is in all these other domains. And so I just laugh and say, well, somebody's actually going to say, oh yeah, let's write the Merkle forest so we can see all the trees efficiently, but that hasn't been done yet. So there's a lot of room in this technology space to revolutionize it performance-wise by a factor of 100 or 200 and make it a lot more flexible to the applications that you would consider important.
Absolutely, Jim. I think you hit this. And I cannot tell you how many questions I get on a daily basis about the speed. And I can tell you with the Noble starts with the Hyperledger, what was it, 1.0? What is it now? Now we have so many more things. With all of that, what I've seen is, we were like 20 transactions second, and what kind of was interesting, like, well, that's much better. Look at the Bitcoin. People going to Bitcoin conference waiting for hours to get their transactions to get a ticket in, right? And kind of when you start with that, like I tell you today, the 7,000 experimenting with the Hyperledger and then others, other core that I know, we're getting in thousands and thousands of transactions. We're getting to credit card speed. We're getting to this. We're already there, if not. So it's not just mainstream yet. So that you're right, Jim, that exponential curve is there and it's going to hit us. We're all sitting there and thinking, oh, it's just 10 transactions a second. And listen, I'm first one to say, yeah, 200 transactions a second. You and I did a lot of blockchain implementation and contracting. And you're like, do you have 200 contracts processed in 1 second? Really? You do? Wow. well, good for you. Then you're in problem, right? But for the most part, that doesn't matter. What mattering is some of those digital marketing decisions. If you could do digital marketing on blockchain and remove fraud, you'll be saving tons of money to advertisers and everybody else, right? But that requires enormous speed. So even with those 200 gen or so speed, it's pretty cool. We're in thousands and even more than that. So we can definitely get there. We're gonna get better and better. But remember, people still think we're on 6 inches. Nothing's happening. We're going to move in nowhere. Well, it's just not true. So one day it's just going to go over, just like cloud did. I remember talking to my dear colleagues at the DHS when they were saying we're never going to use cloud ever. Ask them today. It's like almost the whole department went to cloud. So it's the beauty of recognizing where we on those 6.2 inches deep of water, and I think that we are.
One other thing, Alex, I have a question from the live stream that had asked if whether or not we can apply Hyperledger and your concept to DeFi projects on finance.
Yes. Totally. I would say that some of the finance project that we worked on, some of the banks, we definitely apply that. So I think it's kind of all, it's all pretty universal concept. I think most people get it. It's intuitive, but just sometimes when you get into the delivery, you just limit stuff into something very narrow, and you don't think about how all of this work together.
Okay, let me stop and pause for a second, just ask the audience, do we have anybody else that has a question as well?
Hey, Jim, it's Jim Sinclair. Yeah, I had my hand up for just a second. And I just wanted to comment because I thought your comments were excellent, as Alex's, and it's good to see you again, Alex. Speaking on behalf of the Hyperledger community as a whole, Hyperledger Foundation, I think we still have tremendous challenges with education because we walk into these blockchain conversations, and I'll just use LinkedIn as an example with so many conversations, and someone will be presenting a blockchain discussion point that I happen to know they're referring to a Hyperledger implementation, whatever flavor Hyperledger. And then somebody pipes up and says something about, yeah, but what about the gas fees or something? Just the misunderstanding of the differences between Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Hyperledger, and fundamentally what Hyperledger as an enterprise application is capable of doing, and no criticism intended, but even just within Hyperledger Foundation itself, as you and I have talked about, you show up in a Fabric session and say, well, they're doing this over in Ursa, or they're doing this over in Indy, and people's minds are blown. And so to this last question, I was part of the, I was pleased to be part of the committee for the Hyperledger Global Forum that's coming up, to help select what's being presented. And there is some tremendously exciting presentations lined up, I think, in Hyperledger Global Forum that, to our conversation here, show where some of these different permutations and new models for Hyperledger are going around decentralized finance, identity, unification between chain transactions in Ethereum to Hyperledger Bezu, other applications of NFTs. So I would encourage everyone to sign up for the Global Forum coming up in June, because there's some cool stuff, and also give you a good education, I think, on the breadth and depth of where Hyperledger is going.
Yeah, excellent comments, Jim. For sure, and where the Global Forum said it as well. And Jim, since you actually unmuted yourself, I'm going to pick on you for another thought and see what Alex thinks about it. But the concept, I'll say the traditional model for customer experience now that's so exciting is, we always say human-centered everything. And I say, that's the old school. That's not the new school. So what I mean is, in the old days, we had everything that was, in a sense, I'll call it, a lot of technicians will always be tech-centered. And you're right, that's the wrong place to start, is don't look at the technology, start with the problem and what you're trying to solve. And I'll call it the old school thinking is, all right, start with the user, the customer, in a sense. And I think in many cases, and you hit it, Alex, especially with AI and automation, leave blockchain alone for a second, you add AI and automation in there. And the question is, who is the customer, right? Who is the user? And the answer is, I don't think the user is human anymore. So don't tell me it's a human-centered thing. I'm working on a smart energy app. And in the energy app, we did something because people, to Jim's point, actually, brilliant point, Jim, about what people understand. People only understand what they already know. So when we want to communicate this energy peer-to-peer trading app, we said, okay. So the person that paid us to do it says, I see a trading platform. So we created a traditional trading platform that users would use. And so I actually talked to a bunch of real engineers in utility grids and so on. And it was very obvious that the work of, Jim St. Clair having to make trades back and forth peer-to-peer on energy was just a stupid idea, that he would actually have to do that. There's no value to that activity at all. It's something we could 100% automate, right? So you would literally, in the future vision using AI is say, no, let's do the trading directly. Let's create the marketplace, but let's eliminate the people. We don't need, you could have a dashboard, but we don't need people to be looking at a dashboard and actually taking actions. All you have to do is say, boom, would you like to have an option to optimize your monthly utility bill? Click here. There's no charge for it. Just click on your profile for your account. And if you elect that, we would do automated trading underneath for you and show you, I'll call it potential, or at first potential gains, but actual real gains that are varying all over the place based on the variable demand for energy. So we can automate that trading for you without using people in the process. And I'll pick on you, Jim, because I think you're in the healthcare space. And the way healthcare is moving, it's like it's on me to figure out, do I have a problem? It's on me to reach out to, I'll call it a healthcare service provider. It's always on me to be smart enough, educated enough, and everything else. And the place you live, it doesn't look like the future to me. It looks very different, I think, in your space.
Yeah, the first thing I'd say is I know Alex and I, going back almost 3 years ago, talked about business cases in the public sector. And speaking as a former management consultant, my attitude was always, and I think this supports what you're saying, Jim, define the business case first. There are so many cases where people were trying to, and I have this conversation in healthcare all the time, and people say, well, what's the use of blockchain in healthcare? And I'm like, well, rewind for a second. We're not just trying to throw blockchain in healthcare.
Right.
What we're trying to do is improve a process where decentralization of the activities leads to either a unique capability or an improvement of things. And I think from a healthcare perspective, and I don't want to necessarily call out Adrian, but he is an expert in this as well, the concepts of privacy and user control of information relative to AI are very challenging things. And we have strong cultural opposition to the idea that I should decide first and foremost how my data is being used and how I consent to its use, especially in healthcare. And there are trade-offs there that haven't been decided where, should I really be in a position to keep my doctor from knowing something? Maybe yes, maybe no, but that trade-off should be something that's facilitated or discussed as part of the business case. And right now, the default case is we just have all of your data and we decide what's going to be done with it. And even the changes under the 21st Century Cures Act basically says, oh, fine. So you want your information? There, use some APIs and you can get it all. And our corporate position on the issue is, well, no, you should be able to get access to your data because it's your right, but you should be able to control that in the context of how you manage your identity and the consent for that data at the same time. And, there's lots of ways to do it, but I happen to be pretty religious from a former auditing and compliance standpoint that the Hyperledger frameworks around Indy and Aries provide the most transparent and enterprise deployable ways to do that. Can I do some of that using Microsoft Ion and Bitcoin? Sure, but there's public DIDs there that may create HIPAA challenges. Can I do it with Ethereum? Maybe, but quite frankly, if I walk into a major health center and start talking about using Ethereum, they're going to laugh me out the door. But there are fundamental principles of decentralization that support that business case for user-controlled identity that you look at first. That's my take on it.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. And I think healthcare, there's many applications for blockchain technology and so on, and AI, obviously. But because of the nature of the pandemic and everything else going on, I would say healthcare is in a lead role, in driving a lot of that stuff for sure. All of the problems, the challenges, they all come up in your domain for sure. And what's interesting, I think your point is well taken about the Indy Aries approach to, I'll call it an open identity model based on self-sovereign identity, the idea that I can control my identity, I decide who I'm going to share it with. And the beauty of having run a project for a state last year that went well using that, we did business licensing for a state and with individuals and so on. But the beauty was the whole thing was consent driven, which is unbelievable. So we had this massive record of the fact that, the state grants you a license and says, Jim, you're now an accountant. The thing is, you actually had to accept that license. The level of consent management and control was phenomenal. And then the history is there on the blockchain. It's all there. So the other issues that do come up to me in our domain and maybe in healthcare as well, most of those can be attacked with one of two things, either I'll call it data masking or aggregation, right? So it's up to where the laws are going to shake out on this. But if you look at, I can control my own health data. I don't want to share my health data personally with anybody, right? But the point of it is, if you take my data and then just aggregate the data, the aggregated data probably has less resistance, I assume, to being shared because it's aggregated, it's not individual. And the only other thing, we did this in banking, was we used to do data masking all the time. So here's Jim's real health profile, but now it turns into, I'll call it Donald Duck. So you have the actual individual records, but they're not, in a sense, something that can be tied back to me personally. So
yeah, I like those standards. I mean, I think, Jim, like open banking, open energy, all those standards are there. And I like, this is a phenomenal idea. It's so logical, right?
Yeah.
You should decide what to do with your data. Like, just because somebody's lazy and get your data, and like, I got it, I can do it. You just can't do many of those things. And there are actually some pretty good. And I think the health research, Jim, is going to be changed relatively soon. And how do you run those experiments? How do you compute? I want to run experiments on my own. I mean, we're reaching this stage. Is why do you need to have a million researchers? I can run two. The data should be democratized so that you can do that and you can check it yourself. Obviously with certain, consent and all of that. And we'll get to that, how to get that. And I agree with you, more enterprise-ready systems like Hyperledger are nicely positioned to do that. Makes perfect sense from many, many perspectives. But also, Jim Mason, I think you're hitting on something very nice. I typically tease people and say, well, the bots are humans too. They have feelings too. So we should use the bot-centered design. So that teasing. So in other ways is a lot of time people forget there are a lot more users and factors that interact in. How humans interact with bots is also important. And that's what makes UX and CX way more complex than it is. Looks at the very first kind of classical edge. Well, I'm gonna sit in the room and you tell me what you want. I want to figure it out. It's way more complex than that.
Absolutely. And I'd give Adrian a chance to comment because I know he came off video and his expertise in this area. What we're doing in my data is a great example.
Yeah, this is a very much a business-oriented session. And I think given the experience in the government sector, the opportunity in healthcare is in the government sector because they are the payers. Directly and indirectly, they're paid for way more than half of the healthcare that's on. The healthcare in the US is wasting $1 trillion a year. They are not interested in any of the business process improvements that you mentioned because transparency of the waste is the last thing that they want. So there's very little hope in the short run of selling any of the stuff you're talking about into the hospital provider sector, or even to some extent into the private insurance sector. But on the other hand, so much of the business is controlled by government through Medicare, through Medicaid policies, if not directly, that they in effect can impose change and transformation because very few entities on the provider side can afford to ignore the Medicare rules. And they don't need a law to do that because they don't even need regulation. They just need policy. And I think in selling blockchain and digital transformation to the healthcare sector, that is the fastest way to go. But they do not go easily, again, because of the way politics works and people leave their jobs in regulatory and regulation and government and go back to industry. But that's my opinion.
Yeah, Adrian, that's a brilliant point about, I'll call it the health establishment, if you will. and not just the private side, but more the public side. I have to call myself, I'll call it I'm a visual example of what I call Medicare roadkill. So I'm on Medicare, but if I die, it will have been Medicare that killed me, honestly, because the administration of it is just, it's the complexity of the current systems, the data inaccuracy, the data quality, all of those issues are phenomenal going through that system. And as a guy who went through that, the way it ties out today in healthcare, it actually starts with IRS, it then goes to Social Security, then it goes to Medicare, and then eventually from Medicare, it'll go out to the insurance providers to figure out what you're gonna pay and how you get paid and how much you get charged for something. It's a long process. And having literally lived through what I call the horror show of data problems that aren't correctable on government systems in many cases, it took, in my case, 10 months and I don't know, 57 phone calls, I believe, and an attempted lawsuit just to get a $400 bill paid for something I was covered for, which is not unusual, I don't think. I don't think I'm the only person that goes through that, but it's a challenging system, to your point. And the question I'll throw back is on both you and Alex is, what is the strategy for change? If I look at something like healthcare providers, maybe there's more options. Maybe I'm not locked into one, but with the government, there's only one, to your point, only one system. And so back to your point, how do you drive change?
In healthcare, it's easy. You just aim for transparency because you can't manage what you can't measure. You know, just like we avoided, measuring the impact of gun laws for decades. And now we find ourselves struggling to figure out, what kind of policies might work, do red flag laws work, et cetera, et cetera. The healthcare will only be fixed through transparency. And if you can link your proposal to transparency and still sell it to whoever the customer is, you're golden. But that's the problem.
So and you're right. So I guess it comes down to, in our world, I'll call it publicity, probably, to publicize a problem. Much like people try to publicize the pandemic or climate change. It's going to come down to that. And I don't know how many people have direct experience with problems through a healthcare system, but I'll say you're right. We had in an Identity 2020 Act that never got implemented by the federal government. That got shot down. It was voted on, didn't get passed, and never made it out of the House. But it was an important step forward in trying to get transparency.
You're looking in the wrong place. You have to listen to what Alex was saying about digital transformation. You can't be looking at this from the identity.
No, I wasn't. I was going to say, back to your point on transparency, and you're 100% right, is we don't have transparency. And I would agree with you that only 98% of probably all problems would be improved with transparency, for sure. And so the question is, what do you see as, I call it, a transparency act, if you will, that we could look at, define, and then actually, in a sense, vote on and implement? Because that does make a lot of sense.
Right, it does. It does. I mean, I'm more. It does. I mean, obviously, there's many aspects to it, but I mean, I also in disclosure. I mean, I work with HHS, and they were one of the first implementers of the blockchain in the government space. So much faster than many others. So, and they started that, and so I've seen government folks really thinking about it, and public sector folks, and I would agree. Probably there's a lot more. I would agree, Adrian, on the government side that you can kind of push that, have a ripple effect change through the public sector, through the private sector, just the way like you said. And I think it's where it comes down to, and where I've seen most of it, like coming back to cloud or anything like that, is when you speak with all those folks, and I spoke with a lot of them, is that really comes down to making this a very straightforward argument of what is happening and not doing big bangs. I think a lot of folks come and talk to government folks about doing big bang. Oh, we're going to just go in there, we're change everything overnight, all solved. It doesn't work that way. I'm shocked how much of that is happening. Instead of really rolling up your sleeves and figuring out how do we get that transparency and how you start here, you start there, and doing it in a very direct way. Like today, even like if you look at it, the Department of Homeland Security today, they're experimenting in making green cards on a blockchain. So it's moving on. It's moving on every front. That's the last place I would think they would go with the blockchain, but it's not. So things are moving well across the board. We just have to kind of get more tighter with this use case and with the transformation, how this works. I think we're going to get there. We're going to get there. I'm optimistic. Despite all of it, I mean, I'll never forget. As I said, I'll repeat again. My cloud conversation with very high-level government people said, "Never going to happen here. Are you out of your mind? I'm never going to put my data somewhere in who knows who controls it, right?" Today is like, you have a good data in your government center. Are you sure it's safe? So it's like kind of worked opposite. So you got to be careful about that. Really exponential. We're at those 6 inches right now. So we're going to see a lot more change, a lot going faster. So, eat popcorn and watch it or be part of it. I think it's really what's happening.
Yeah. I did want to say thanks to Adrian, though. The point on transparency goes across the board for literally everything. And without it, it's very hard to drive change anywhere. So that's kind of like a core building block for trust. It begins with transparency, I guess. We have another comment I want to point out. From Jayakar in the chat, talking about a portable, unique digital medical record in Hyperledger framework as a basic facility to control, I guess, COVID, as accurate data is imperative for any new research and development, which is true. And that's a great idea. The idea, it does work. I'll say even in the identity space, we implemented what was available in wallet standards and so on. And yet those are moving verifiable credentials. W3C has one now. So it's great when we have, in a sense, a solution like this portable medical record, and anything that becomes a standard is a huge win for us. One other thing I want to point out, Daniela has mentioned a couple of things. Number one, if you're looking at the global forum, and I'll make sure I publish it on our website with the meeting recording, there's a discount available, a discount code you can use to register for Hyperledger Global Forum. And then also there's a
and the ticket's only $50. And if someone's doesn't qualify as a nonprofit or a government, there's some scholarships, or just go ahead and reach out to myself.
Sure.
Jim's happy to connect.
Can you cover the other point about the data?
Sure. When we were just talking about data, there's a project going on right now at the World Economic Forum. It's called the Data for Common Purpose Initiative, and Hyperledger is participating in that work, primarily around the interoperability chapter. Maybe, I didn't know if they had come over and kind of talked to you about that initiative. It might be something good to do a presentation on in this SIG.
Yeah, no, it's a great idea. And actually, you're right. I'm part of the EU blockchain forum over there, and there's certain topics they cover, but that certainly isn't part of what we've covered over there. And then there also is the EC now has a new blockchain proposal out, which I think is also worthy of covering as well.
Okay.
So they also lead like GDPR. They obviously threw that out there long before the US did anything. And then I'd say certainly your data common purpose initiative would be pretty cool to get a session here on that. That's excellent.
Okay. I do need to run as well.
Okay. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody today. I know we're a little bit over for the session, but I do have the session recording. I'm going to post that. And Alex, if I can ask you if I can get a PDF of your slide presentation, I'll post that as well. And so it's been a great session.